session this morning is all about how you can have better conversations and how you can tame your advice monster and be curious instead. As we've noted, this session is going to be recorded today for colleagues who can't join us and be with us. Your cameras and your microphones have been disabled, but we would still really actively encourage you to participate in the session by using the reaction buttons and also by sharing some of your comments and your stories with us in the chat function too. So why don't you have a quick practice and tell us where you're joining from today? So for the next hour, what are we going to cover? So as we've already suggested, it's all about how we can have better conversations, and we really want to give you some practical materials and top tips that you can leave the session with today as well. So we're going to share with you a concept from Michael Bungay-Stanier about your advice monster, which sounds really intriguing. We all have our advice monsters, but we really want you to be aware of how you can take notice of them a little bit more. And actually, when you're in the conversation, how can you start to apply some of the principles as well? So we'll start to share that with you first of all. And then Nick will come on and he's going to share all of the other things that make conversations a little bit tricky. And we would be interested to hear from you about your experience of difficult conversations as well, because we know that that's a really hot topic at the moment. And then we're then going to share a really short video from Simon Sinek, who you might have heard of before or might not. And he is going to talk to us about the art of listening by talking less and listening more to help you to build trust in conversations as well. And then today's final session is going to be really interactive. We're going to invite you to come on and put your hand up, and we'd really like you to share some of what you've heard and actually how can you start to apply some of what you've heard as well. So what might be some of your first steps? So that's just a little bit about what we've got covered. So I'm sure you're all intrigued to hear about what are advice monsters. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more. But before I do that, it's just to acknowledge that conversations happen all the time in everyday conversations. They might be a little bit informal with your partner, a family member, or even a friend. And sometimes at work, they can become a little bit more formal with your colleagues and your line manager. But nevertheless, conversations happen all the time. And during the session today, we'd really like you to think about a recent conversation that you've had with someone that you wish could have went a little bit better. What was that sliding doors moment for you? What could have made the difference to that conversation now? Well, what I'd like you to do is start to think about how often in a conversation, when you're just looking to offload something, has that other person that you're talking to, have they given you some helpful or maybe not so helpful piece of advice that you didn't want or need? So I think for us, the good news is that we do have some top tips, and I think this is what we're going to share with you now. It's a fantastic video, as I've suggested from Michael, about how you can stop trying to give that advice as your first natural default position and how you can start to take a bit of a different approach to these conversations.
So I caught up with a friend of mine the other day. I love her. She's smart, she's brilliant, she's talented. And after we grabbed our coffees and we did the usual warm-up chit-chat, Shannon looked at me and she said, "Michael, you're a good guy. I need your help. I need your advice." And my monster was delighted. She started telling me what was going on, and I started to pretend to listen, because quite frankly, my advice monster already knew exactly what I wanted to tell her. But I'm pretty good at the fake active listening. You know, you tip your head on the side, you nod, you look engaged, yet caring, yet concerned. Small, meaningless words of encouragement. Yeah, sure. Yeah, right. Oh, you go, girlfriend. And exactly. But honestly, my advice monster's like, could we just hurry this up, please? The time is short. Finally, Shannon finished. So finally, I was able to share my brilliant advice. And make no mistake, it was brilliant. Shannon tipped her head on the side, looked engaged, yet caring, yet concerned, started nodding, made small, meaningless words of encouragement. Yeah, maybe. Okay. Yeah, nice idea. Honestly, my advice, my help was going nowhere. my advice monster had sabotaged the conversation again. Now, this isn't just a Michael thing. It's not even a mansplaining thing. You, all of you, you know your advice monster. Somebody starts telling you about something, you don't really know the situation, you don't really know the people involved, you certainly don't have the full context, you definitely don't have the technical specifications, and after about 10 seconds, your advice monster's like, oh, I've got something to say here. You know, research tells us that medical doctors' advice monsters tend to interrupt their patients after about 11 seconds. But that's not really a medical thing, it's a human thing. Now, I can see some of you are looking at me and you're thinking to yourself, Michael, it's true. Other people's advice monsters, very annoying, really pretty irritating. But my advice is honestly pretty fantastic. And what's wrong with advice anyway? Well, look, there is nothing wrong with advice. Advice is a key part of civilization. I mean, TEDx, it is one large forum for advice. The problem isn't with advice. The problem is when giving advice becomes our default response. And we all have this ingrained way of behaving. For most of us, it's become a habit. It's become an advice-giving habit. Or, for short. And it turns out there are 3 ways that advice giving goes bad. The first 2 are kind of connected. Here's the first challenge with advice giving. You're busy solving the wrong problem. This happens all the time. We get seduced into thinking that the first challenge that shows up is the real challenge. It almost never is. It's people's best guess. It's their first hypothesis. It's a stab in the dark. But it's really rare that the first challenge is the real challenge. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that somehow miraculously you are finding and working on the real challenge. Here's the second issue with advice giving. Your advice is not nearly as good as you think it is. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh, no, Michael, no, my advice is magnificent. Well, I'd encourage you to go watch all those TED videos on cognitive biases that will explain just how bad your advice normally is, particularly if you think you give good advice. But those first 2 are just you kind of wasting people's time and life and resources and money. So, no big deal. The third issue about giving advice cuts a little deeper, and it cuts both ways. If you are on the receiving end of advice, if you're on the receiving end of somebody's advice monster, you're constantly getting the message that you can't figure this out yourself. And that cuts away at your sense of competence and your confidence and your sense of autonomy. And if you're on the other side of the equation, if you have an advice monster, and if I can be clear, you all have an advice monster, well, forget about the fact that you're disempowering people, and forget about the fact that you're a bottleneck to everybody around you. Just that added responsibility of having to have all the answers and to save the person and to save the day, it's exhausting and it's frustrating and it's overwhelming. Now, I can see you looking at me and going, yeah, Michael, point well made. We get this. I get it. I understand. Yeah, fair enough. And I know you do get it. It's straightforward. You get this. In theory. In practice, this is still how you're showing up on an everyday basis. So what's going on with that? Well, it's your advice monster. You keep feeding it, and it is insatiable. Somebody starts talking, and your advice monster looms up out of the dark and goes, oh, I'm going to add some value to this conversation. Yes, I am. Here I go. You have to learn to tame your advice monster. And to tame it, you have to understand it. And it turns out your advice monster has 3 different personas. And you listen up, you'll hear the one that resonates most for you. The first persona of the advice monster is tell it. Tell it. It's the loudest of the 3. It has convinced you that the only way that you add value is to have the answers, to have all the answers, to have all the answers to all the things. If you don't have all the answers, then you fail. Anybody kind of know this one? Yeah, I thought as much. The second advice monster, a little more subtle, it's called save it. Save it has put its arm around you and gone, your job, your only job, is to rescue everybody. Don't let anybody stumble, struggle, have a difficult time. Don't let anybody fail. If anybody struggles at all, you fail. Anybody know this one? Any parents in the room, for instance? Exactly. The third of the advice monsters, the sneakiest of the three, is control it. Control it has convinced you that the only way you win is to maintain control at all times. Don't let go the grip of anything. If anybody else takes over control even a little bit, then you and they will definitely fail. Anybody know controller? That's my favorite one personally. And in fact, there's something that connects all three of these personas. And this is an important point. In that singular moment, when your advice monster is in control, you are saying that you are better than the other person. You are better than the other person. You're saying that they're not up to it. You're saying they're not good enough. You're saying they're not smart enough, wise enough, fast enough, moral enough, experienced enough. You're basically saying that they're not good enough. But it's not only the other person that is diminished in this moment when your advice monster is in control. You're diminished as well. Because when your advice monster is in control, you lose that connection to your humanity. You lose that connection to your empathy and your compassion and your sense of vulnerability. You start using your answers as your armor. Now, I was going to give you a quick little talk about the power of empathy and compassion and vulnerability, and then I thought to myself, Brene Brown. Oh, the Dalai Lama. Oh, Jesus. Okay, I think this ground's been pretty much covered. So rather than that, let me give you a quick primer on how you might go about taming your advice monster. And what you're looking to do is replace an old habit, the advice-giving habit, with a new habit. Can you stay curious a little bit longer? It's as simple and as difficult as that. Can you stay curious a little bit longer? How do you stay curious? Well, questions are the kindling of curiosity. They're the light that holds back that darkness of the advice monster. So let me share with you the three questions I wished I'd asked Shannon when we were in that cafe together. The first question is this: what's the real challenge here for you? What's the real challenge here for you? It's the focus question. It recognizes that at the start of a conversation, neither of you really know what's going on. You just both think you do. So not only does what's the real challenge here for you keep your advice monster at bay, it repositions you to say the most important thing I can be doing here is to help you find the really important issue, not to provide the fast, wrong answer, which is what happens right now. The second question that I wish I'd asked Shannon is, and what else? And what else? So the acronym is AWE. It's literally an awesome question. And what else has it as the insight that the first answer they give you is never their only answer, and it's rarely their best answer. So when you ask, and what else, not only does it tame your advice monster, but it helps you go deeper and further on any question that you ask. So before I give you the third question, which I think you're going to like, let me just show you how these two questions can play really well together. So we're going to do something live right here with us. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of a real challenge that's going on for you right now. It can be big, it can be small, it can be about life, it can be about work, it can be about a project, it can be a person. I don't mind what it is. Take your best guess. This is a real thing, so actually think of something. You can write it down if you want, or you can just keep it in your head. And now you've got that challenge in mind. I'm going to ask you a question. Here it is. Thinking of that challenge, what's the real challenge here for you? What's the real challenge here for you? Yeah, I can see people working. I can hear brains ticking over. This is great. Stuff's opening up for you as you think about that. You're like, okay, I think I've got the real challenge here for me. That's nice. But we're not done yet. Let me ask you another question. And what else? What else is the real challenge here for you? Because I know there's more than one thing. So what else? What else is a real challenge here for you? Just notice how that's popping up and how stuff is opening up for you. Which is lovely. But of course, we're not done yet. I've got another question for you. What else? What else is the real challenge here for you? Because there's still more to be unpacked here. Some of you are like, this is amazing. I didn't know this is all here. Where is this all coming from? Right. I've got one final question for you. I'm going to step to the edge of the red spot here just to make it really dramatic. Now that you've considered all of that and you've done some thinking, what's the real challenge here for you? Exactly, your head explodes. You're like, oh my God, what happened here? And for some of you, you're like, wow, this is really in a minute or less, just open up a new way of seeing this. But actually, here's a really key part of this. You'll notice that your answer to the first, what's the real challenge, and your answer to the final one was different. And why that matters is if I'd been busy trying to solve that first challenge, I'd be offering up my slightly crappy advice to solve the wrong problem. And honestly, that's what's happening all the time. The third question that I wished I'd asked Shannon back in that cafe, it's a difficult question, but it's so powerful. The question is, what do you want? What do you want? Because when you get clear on what you want, it becomes the foundation for action. It becomes the foundation for progress. When you know what you want, you get to step towards that autonomy and that competence and that confidence that we were talking about before. And when that happens, your advice monster really has not much chance. So that's the challenge in front of us, to replace an old habit, the advice-giving habit, with a brand new habit, staying curious a little bit longer. Because when you do that, you begin to empower people, not by giving them the answer, but by helping them find their own answer. Not by rescuing them, but by helping them find their own path. Not by holding on to control on everything, but by giving up some control and inviting others to step in and to step up. And all of that becomes possible when you tame your advice monster. Thank you.
I think I was first introduced to this video when I joined NHS Education for Scotland last year. And I think in that time, in the last 14 months, I must have watched the video about 50 times. And every single time I feel like I'm in a therapy session myself, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was my real problem today. It's something that I truly get a lot of value out of as well. I'd be really interested if you managed to capture the 3 questions that Michael shared with us. Did you manage to get them? For me, I think they sound really super easy, but when you're in that heat of the moment, it can be really, really tricky to not interject and to not share your own views and advice. My top tip of the day is to keep practicing. And that's the hardest thing. So even if you start by asking that very first question, what is the real challenge for you? And then you can potentially gradually introduce the other 2 questions into the conversation as well. But even just to get that first start, I think that would be a really great way to introduce this into your conversations as well. But, you know, these 3 questions, they are really straight to the point and they can help you to fix the right problem and stop wasting some of your time that potentially you have been having, and that can be a real challenge as well. But for me, they are actually really genuine, and they can help you to stay that curious a little bit longer, to help the other person to dig down into finding out what actually is the real problem for them. But just to end this session about the advice monster, I just want to share with you a little advice haiku. And it is about tell less, ask more. Your advice is not as good as you think it is. And I think that is a really nice way to summarise this little part of the session before we move on. So I'm now going to pass over to, oh, Emma, I could see you just raised your hand. Did you have a question or? And I can see someone's asking, Connie, can you be more than one monster? Absolutely. For me, it depends how hungry I am, how much sleep I've had, who am I having the conversation with. So I would say 100% you can absolutely have more than one monster. And I can see that, Karen, you've said, I find it so hard to listen as an extrovert. My personality wasn't to fix everything, and I think I have the answers. Eek. I know this isn't right. Very helpful session. And I think that's so interesting coming from an extrovert, because I'm an introvert, and I try and think, well, this person really wants me to give something really meaningful. But actually, I think for me, a lot of this today is about listening, and listening can be really hard, and that isn't easy either. But yes, really appreciate your comments, and I'm now going to hand you over to Nick for the next part of the session this morning.
Right. Thanks, Heather. And hello, everyone. I also like the comment that Fiona Broadley had put into the chat saying, I need to ask myself these questions more regularly. And I thought, yeah, that's a good point, actually. I like that too. Okay. So I'm going to just take control of the slides. Okay, so what we're going to do just now is we're going to talk about things that make conversations hard. So we've talked about giving advice, but there's also a whole load of things around. They're called difficult conversations for a reason, because they're difficult, and there are reasons for that. And we're going to talk about what those are. So let's have a look at this. Okay, so we've got, this is the kind of, I looked hard on Pixabay, where we get our resources from, our picture resources from, to find the most kind of festering, disgusting looking thing, cauldron. I'm going to call it the cauldron of caustic conversations. So, okay, so imagine you've got your difficult conversation, your caustic conversation container, and what makes things so difficult is all the emotions, all the stuff that is in there. Can you imagine? You just add, I mean, you know, add lashings. I mean, not just a bit, lashings of all of these things. There's fear in there. There's paranoia. There's self-doubt. Old history, meaning, you know, all the stuff that you said, oh, you know, 5 years ago this happened to me, and so-and-so, you know, treated me badly, and I've never forgotten it. Old scripts, the kind of stories that we tell ourselves in our heads, you know, oh, you've never liked me, or that person's never liked me, or, you know, this is what they always do, that kind of thing. So imagine that all of these things are in there, that all of these things are going on in your head when you're having a difficult conversation. And also remember, this is something I've been reading recently about a neuroscientist talking about the brain and saying our brains don't like this stuff. They don't like ambiguity. Our brains don't like discomfort. And particularly if you think about, you know, when you're having difficult conversations, you're having these with another individual. And we are, as human beings, you know, we've had hundreds of thousands of years of evolution where being respected, being part of a group, being part of a tribe was essential to your survival. So actually, our brains are egocentric. They want us to look good. They want us to be liked. They want all these things because that's how we survive. So suddenly, you're dealing with all sorts of things that make you deeply uncomfortable and possibly are going to make you disliked by someone. And I mean, you'll know, you know, the lengths that we can go to avoid all of that. So when you have these emotions going on, they trigger fight, flight, or freeze responses, particularly fear. And these actually shut down your higher brain functions because your body says, right, we need all the blood and energy. Your brain uses a phenomenal amount of energy. We need all of that for running or fighting or doing whatever we're going to do. So we're going to just shut down some stuff because you don't need it. And you'll know what it's like when you're in a difficult conversation and a kind of fog gradually kind of trickles down. And it happens to me. I feel the fog coming on, and I can feel the emotions and I can feel my heart pounding. And it's not good. You know, you think, how are you supposed to have a rational, you know, conversation with somebody when all of that stuff is going on? So it is really difficult. Now, I'm going to give you a little example of a conversation that I had recently where a lot of these things were going on. This was in a work context, and I had forgotten to do something. There was a piece of this piece of work, it was actually a presentation, and I had forgotten to include something that I should have done. And there happened to be a senior person in the room who noticed this, and they were justifiably not terribly happy about it. And I go, okay, I got that. But what they did was they emailed, not me, but they emailed my director to tell them this and to share this and say, oh, just notice this, and Nick's going to put it right, and don't worry about it, and all of this stuff. So you can kind of imagine that immediately, what was going on in my head. So I had fear. This is a senior person, quite often fear is it's hard to explain it. Actually, it was just fear because they were more senior. That was it, really. Paranoia. What are they going to do? How's this going to affect me? All the catastrophizing that can go on in your head. Self-doubt. Oh, maybe they were right. Maybe maybe it was me. Maybe I don't know. There wasn't any old history or old scripts. Actually, there was an old script going on, which was about myself to myself, which is some of the things that I have done in the past. And I thought, hang on a minute, no, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to do something about it. So I then was able to present a reply and take that forward. And I kind of basically said, Nick, you tell other people to do this stuff, do it yourself, go on. So I did. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go through some of the other examples. Okay, so we've talked about some of the things that might be going on in your head, all the emotions. And something else that really annoys me is when people say, let's be rational about this. Let's take the emotions out of it. And you can't. You can't do that because the emotions are a huge part of this. And quite often it's the emotions that make other people uncomfortable. So you might find somebody else saying, oh, let's take the emotions out of this. It's uncomfortable. Let's be rational. And you just can't do that. Or you can try, but you're then taking out a whole chunk of stuff that's still going on inside. So let's look at something. This is something that Heather and I have been reading about recently, and we think is really helpful. So this is about something called positions versus needs. So let's imagine you've got these two chefs in the kitchen, and there is one orange, and they both need the orange, and they are having a disagreement about that. So, okay, have a look at what they're saying. So my dish is more important than yours. I deserve that orange. You never let me have the orange. I hate you. And when I looked at these conversations, I think, yeah, I've had variations of that conversation and said things like that. So it's like, okay. Now, this is a position. They're in a position. They've dug themselves in. They put up the barricades. They're in a position, and that's not a good place to be. So your position is not going to help. But what do they need? So let's say, okay, one of them needs the zest, and one of them needs the juice. Brilliant. So they can both have the orange. They can both use the orange. But if they hadn't talked about what they needed, you just end up with this and no result. So let's take this a little bit into perhaps your own context. So let's talk a bit about workload. So let's imagine that the person on the left is a staff member, and the person on the right is a manager. Okay, so I've had these kind of types of conversations. I can imagine that you might have. And basically, both sides have dug in, both sides have put up the defenses, and they are just saying, you're doing this, you don't understand my situation, you don't care, things like that. Okay, now that's never going to get you very far. But let's go to, okay, forget the positions, what do they need? So, okay, well, maybe we can have a conversation about this. So one of them says, I need to understand where the work fits. That's a reasonable request. I need to understand how soon you need it. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I need you to hear me. Okay, now that's important too. But equally, looking at the other side, looking at the manager. So what's the manager need? Well, the manager's feeling pressure to get the job done. And the manager needs the other person to understand this and say, it's not my fault. I am getting pressure from up here to fix stuff. And I need you to hear me. So if you look at this and think, okay, here's a basis for a conversation. We can have a conversation about this. We can talk about this. This is going to get us somewhere. So, okay. Now, thinking of the example where I mentioned before, where I had somebody, a more senior manager, commenting on something. What I was just like, and I was upset. So what I thought was, okay, let's try and find out the need. Let's try and have a conversation about this. Let's try and work out what was it. So I was curious. I was like, why? I was curious about why the message had gone to somebody else, somebody more senior, somebody who I responded to, as opposed to me directly. So that's the conversation I tried to have. I said, okay, help me understand. I'm curious about, and we actually did have a conversation, and it worked out. It worked out well. But I thought very much about this, and I thought, no, I need to think about this. I need to do again. Think about the things you tell other people. Nick, do it yourself. So I did. We're going to have a listen to somebody, Simon Sinek, talking about listening, because we've talked about the kind of how you might feel. We've talked about the different positions that people might take. Let's talk about listening and how that can help you to build trust.
So listening is a trust-building exercise, right? If you're in take it down to a personal relationship. If you've ever had a romantic relationship, a loved one, right? Making someone feel heard doesn't mean you're wrong. Saying sorry doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you take accountability for your actions. And I think it is important that when somebody objects to vaccination, that we don't demonize or villainize them, but we attempt to hear them, make them feel heard. Doesn't mean we have to agree, but they have to feel heard. And listening is not hearing the words. It's making the other person feel that they were heard. We don't get to decide when hearing has happened, when listening has happened. They do. And by the way, it's not 100% successful either, because some people are just hell-bent on, but that's a minority. And so I think the exercise is sitting down with people and say, tell me what you're going through. Tell me what you're afraid of. I want to understand, because we're trying to make everyone safe. I want to hear what your thing is. And let them tell their story. We have no answers. We're not there to object. We're not there to react. We're not there to fix or tell them that they're wrong. Women are better than this than men. And I think that has to happen. And it can happen simultaneously. They are not mutually exclusive. I'll give you one example, which is I have a friend who refused to get vaccinated. And I sat down with her and I said, tell me your reasoning, right? She goes, well, this new technology, like, we don't know, it hasn't been out long enough. Like, we don't know. So what I hear is fear of the unknown, okay? I go on, and I let her talk and say her thing and explain all the things, and I simply said, so you're afraid of the mRNA technology, right? Yes. I don't want them screwing with my DNA. I said, well, just so you know, it's 20-year-old technology, but then I found something I could agree with her. But you're right. It is the first time it's been commercialized. You're absolutely right. It's the first time we've put it in the market. So I affirmed her fear. And then I said, do you get flu shots every year? She goes, I do. I said, okay, Johnson & Johnson is a good old-fashioned flu shot. It's a different technology. It's not mRNA. So you're 100% right. If you're afraid of the new technology, don't get Moderna or Pfizer. But Johnson & Johnson it's just like a flu shot. It's the same old tech. And she went, it is? I went, it is. She went and got a Moderna shot. Because she just wanted to be heard, because most of her friends, when she said, I'm not getting vaccinated, yelled at her, told her she was stupid, told her she's an idiot, told her she's letting her friends down, told her she's making other people sick, told her she's a risk to society. That doesn't make somebody's mind open up. All I did was let her feel heard. I think we have to do that.
We're coming towards the end of the session, so we would like to share our own examples about how we have tried to use this in our own everyday life and experience. So I have asked my brother that I can share this example, which is great. So I have an older brother, and he is a fantastic tradesperson. So he has done this job ever since he left college. So he's been doing this job for potentially nearly 20 years, if not longer. He is very experienced in what he does. He's known across Fife, and people really look up to him. But in addition to his job, he is a family man. He has 2 young children, and they are the centre of his world. They have completely changed his life, and I think he is now in a position where he would like to change his career. So an opportunity presented itself when we were on a car journey back from Dundee. And it was just myself and my brother, which is a very, very rare opportunity. And that journey took us about an hour. And that's where he first told me that he would like to start thinking about changing his career, because he's getting a bit older and he can't really do the job that he's doing for, forever. He can't do it in his 50s and his 60s. So he's looking to change the opportunity. So I was like, right, I'm going to practice what I've just heard in that video. I'm going to really try, and I'm going to introduce that first question. So I asked my brother, I said, well, what is the real challenge for you about changing your career? And the first point he said was going back into higher education. And it started to reveal actually a lot of more anxieties that I think he had even realised. So potentially going back into further education, what does that mean about cost, about fees? And what actual impact would that have on his family, especially when actually that's the reason why, why he's so passionate about what he does. He has every Friday off. He does compressed hours, which is crazy. And I think in that conversation with my brother, when I started to use these 3 questions, and I said, and what else? So, what's your next challenge? And then he went into something else that he didn't even know about himself. And for me, in that conversation with my brother, I learned more than I had in the last, 5 years of me asking my brother, so how are you? How did you get on today? What did you do? Who did you visit? And it was such an enlightening conversation that I thought, oh, wow, these 3 questions are really powerful, but really so effective. And it was really hard for me not to suggest what he might do next. Obviously, that's why I think he wanted to start the conversation with me, because that's my job, my career, my focus. But I didn't, and I stuck to the general script, and that just opened up such a massive conversation. And even today, a few months on, he has started to look at different perspectives, different colleges, different universities that he might want to explore, to really think about what is on his horizon. So for me, I think, I really enjoy the 3 questions. They're really easy to remember, and I really hope that you can potentially start to use them in your conversations after today as well. Do you have another example that you'd like to share?
There was another example I was thinking of, actually.
Okay.
It's another personal one. It's actually to do with, it's actually not work related, so home related. This is about housework. And
no.
I know. And we are selling our flat. So as you may know, if you've ever had to do this, the idea is to make whatever property you're trying to sell ridiculously tidy, unfeasibly tidy. There's kind of things where people come and take photos and you go, come on, nobody lives in that flat, for others to see and come and have a look at. So every time somebody comes to visit and to look, and potential buyer, we have to make the flat unfeasibly tidy. And I tend to do more of the housework, shall we say, than my partner does. Now, I was thinking, interesting. It depends how I say that, because if I say I tend to do more of the housework, just saying that, I've immediately made that a position. I've turned it into a position. Whereas if I say, we share the housework between us, I tend to do more than my partner does. you go, that doesn't feel like a position. Whereas if I go, here's my position, here's my subtext. So there was a bit of the other day when we had somebody coming to visit, and there was a bit of my passive aggressive housekeeping where I crash bang, all right, no, I suppose I better hoover that, suppose I better do that, suppose mutter, wander around, crash bang wallop. And my partner asked me a really good question, because she was actually doing what I should have done. And she asked me what she said, okay, how can I help? What do you need? And I was like, and I suddenly went, hang on, what do I need? And that actually first of all stopped me from going, but also made me think, what do I need? And she said, oh well, okay, perhaps if you do this bit and I'll do that bit. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. And suddenly I calmed down, but it became amicable, it became productive, and it was actually useful. Whereas me stomping around being a grump wasn't helpful. So I'm going to put my hand up and say that was a poor example. It was actually somebody else doing what I should have done. But I often I remember that now, and I think, hang on, and of course with the position, with the housekeeping, I made all sorts of assumptions, jump to conclusions. Positions, quite often you're assuming things about other people and what they really want, and not finding out what they need, and then not finding out what you need. So there's my example.
So we just want to thank everybody so much for joining us, for coming along. Really hope that you've taken some top tips away from the session, and we really wish you well and luck in trying to practice some of what can be really quite difficult conversations as well.